at Anglia Ruskin University and has considerable experience as a writer of teaching materials and as a teacher trainer. So, over to you, Steph.
Hello, good afternoon everybody, and thank you very much for coming along to this session, enabling learners to assess and progress. As Charlotte said, there'll be time for questions and answers at the end, so if you do have any questions, don't forget to type them into the text box and we'll try and pick them up. Beginning with the title of the webinar today, Assess and Progress. These two things are essentially often linked, and lots and lots of theorists have drawn a link between the two aspects of learning, and autonomy is a sort of key part of assessment nowadays as well. And so I'd just like to identify what we're going to be looking at during the session. So we're going to be considering the benefits of autonomy and how autonomy allows students to assess their own learning. And we're also going to consider how that process generally benefits learners. We're going to also pick up on some techniques and approaches for the classroom, some practical ideas that will help both teachers and learners assess learning for short, mid and long-term goals. And we're going to consider what we mean by autonomy in relation to learning-oriented assessments. So those are the aims of the webinar. And I'd like to begin by thinking about what we mean when we talk about autonomous learners, and why we think this is an important or helpful characteristic for learners. So I wonder if you could use the chat box and just type your ideas into the bar at the bottom. So I'll give you a moment or two. What do we mean by an autonomous learner? Why is it important? Okay, so the first comment that has come up from Rizwana is independent. So an independent learner, self-motivated learner is coming up. Denelson has suggested a learner who is aware of his or her learning progress. Other comments, someone who can self-study, who can learn by themselves, self-directed learning, somebody who sets his own learning goals and knows how to achieve them. Okay, being able to self-study. Svetlana suggests they're taught how to learn. Okay, so we've got an interesting mix of ideas. The idea of independence, of being self-directed, is coming up quite a lot. But it's nice to see a few of you mentioning that they need to be taught how to do this. And I think that is an idea we will pick up on through the webinar. Okay, so we've had lots of ideas about why, what we mean by an autonomous learner. But let's do a little task. This is something I actually ask students to do. I quite like getting them to do alliteration. So here we've got being autonomous is awesome because. You could also have things like working with my friends is wicked because, or working by myself is marvelous because. So it's a little play on words, and I actually get students to do this and fill it out themselves. Often it's a good way to introduce the word autonomous to them, but I would like you to now fill this in. So it's the second part of my original question. We've talked about what we think an autonomous learner is, but why is it beneficial? And I actually ask my students to do this. Why do they think being autonomous is awesome? So again, could you put your ideas into the text box? You don't have to do it with alliteration. So being autonomous is awesome because, why? Why do you think? Again, I'll give you a few moments. Okay, so Rosanna says they can follow their own pace. Donna says it can take your learning in the direction you wish to. Learning depends on you. From Visa. Maro says speed. I presume that means that they can pace according to their own needs. And Agnes suggests it builds self-esteem. Tiana's suggested lots of things. Can take charge of learning, note and record things, be proud of learning. I am my own master. That's very nice. Brian has suggested it builds self-confidence, and people can learn whatever they need, wherever they need, from Svetlana. Okay, lots of really, really nice ideas there. And I think they're all very helpful. And what I'd like to do is to pick up on some of these ideas myself and suggest some ideas for you. So one of the benefits of learners who are autonomous is that they are kind of ready to learn. It means that they have the skills to learn and tend to make better progress as a result of being autonomous. Not only are they ready to learn within the classroom, obviously their learning is more effective outside the classroom too. It means that learning continues and progress continues beyond the classroom and the kind of the input of the teacher. The other benefit of autonomy as a learner characteristic is that it allows learners to transfer their strategies to other learning areas. It's not just in terms of their language learning. They can benefit from other learning areas as well. Now, these are all characteristics that are highlighted by Ellis and Sinclair in their Learning How to Learn book from 1984, and I think they still hold true now. Basically, I think if we are asking learners to be autonomous, we're asking them to work independently. That is, we're asking them to make a series of judgments about their own work, how well they're doing and what they need to do better in order to make further progression. Now, that series of judgments is often therefore related to assessment, so this is why autonomy is important in terms of assessment and progression. If students are only ever seeing formative imposed assessment imposed by the teacher onto the students or by the educational institute onto them, it's not particularly helpful for their autonomy or their development. So Bood, who has done lots of work on learning-oriented assessment, suggests that we need to see assessment in a different context. We need to see assessment as a way of students developing sustainable approaches to education. In other words, that they learn how to assess their own learning so that once they leave the formal infrastructures of education, they're able to continue to learn, to develop their own learning themselves. And I think those are very, very important points. Now, what does that mean in terms of teaching, and what does that mean in terms of learning? We set a poll at the beginning of the webinar, and we're going to publish the results now. So we asked everybody to answer the question or the statement, autonomous learners complete tasks outside of the classroom on their own. And we had a kind of mixture of responses. So the majority of people have said this is true, and we've got a few maybes and 1 or 2 falses. I would suggest that if you've written true, I can kind of see why you've said that, because it is true. Certainly it's a partial statement, but I think I would probably go for maybe myself. I think that there's often an assumption that by autonomy we mean that we give learners tasks and they do them at home, or they set their own tasks outside of the classroom. But I think that the characteristics of an autonomous learner are more than that. So if you said maybe, you're probably right, but that's not the only characteristic of autonomy in learning. So let's now have a look at a definition. So what can an autonomous learner do? All right, so here we go. I would suggest that an autonomous learner is somebody who understands goals and outcomes. The first step is that they understand exactly what they are trying to achieve, because they're unable to develop and progress unless they know what their aims are. The second characteristic is that they understand how to get to those end goals, and the types of activity or practice that will allow them to achieve those goals and outcomes. And these pathways are things that they're able to apply both inside a classroom and outside a classroom. So this is where where the poll is partly true, that yes, autonomous learners can work on tasks outside of class, but they should also be bringing the characteristic of autonomy to bear inside the classroom as well. I think another key characteristic is that autonomous learners are able to make decisions for themselves about the best way for them to learn, so about their own pathway to learning, and that they are able to organise their own study effectively. So, for example, they manage their time effectively, they manage the areas that they focus on effectively to promote the best benefits for themselves. And this leads, I think, to all of the things that you have mentioned in terms of building their own self-esteem. I think all of these things connect. If students can understand their goals and outcomes and how to achieve them, they're able to work more effectively inside and outside the class. If they can do that, they're able to make good decisions, for example, when they are working alone, on what would benefit them the most. And if they're able to do those things effectively, they should be able to build up their own study program effectively. And all of these things will give them a sense of confidence and achievement. So each of these characteristics is a crucial element because they all link together. So, as we've said, autonomy and self-assessment are very closely linked. Oscarson identifies self-assessment as a key feature in autonomy. As I've said already, if students are able to understand how well they are doing, it allows them to continue to progress towards their goals and outcomes. So self-assessment requires learners to use different learning strategies. If they're able to self-assess, they understand what works for them and what doesn't work for them as learners. It gives them much more self-awareness, and it's motivating them in terms of goal orientation. It's also helpful for teachers because it allows the teacher to support them much better. If understanding how you're doing is key to progression, then self-assessment is also key to progression. And this is supported by the theorists who all say that self-assessment is essential to learning. So I would just like to ask you to respond now. In terms of your classrooms, do you find that autonomy and self-assessment is something that students find easy to achieve? Do you see evidence of that in your classrooms at the moment? Could you just take a moment and type into the text box and let me know what you think? Do you see evidence that your own learners have good autonomy, good self-assessment skills? So Demet says it depends on the level of the students. Some say yes, depends on the age of the learners. Some need maturity. Rosanna says she works with very young ones. Carla says yes. Alma says it's not easy for them, only a low percentage manage. And Rebecca says not particularly. So we've got quite mixed responses there, and we've got a kind of number of issues that people have raised. Age is one of them, and confidence is another. I think, unfortunately, this webinar, we don't have time to look at every aspect, so we're not looking necessarily at very young learners specifically. I'm afraid we will touch on it, but we won't be looking specifically. My feeling is that it is possible for learners to begin to develop autonomy, and I think it's important that they do, but I think it's very much part of the role of the teacher to start building and developing those skills within their own learners. And we'll look at some of the reasons why students and teachers find that difficult shortly. So what I'd like you to do now is just to clarify again some of the benefits to learners. So very quickly, we've touched on this already. Why do you think learners benefit from developing autonomy and self-assessment skills? Very briefly, if you could type in your answers. So we've had a suggestion it's good for lifelong learning. Absolutely agree with that. Yep, a couple of people have mentioned this. It brings out their innate skills. Career development has been mentioned. Sense of achievement, gives them a better attitude to learning, allows them to progress in learning. Okay, lots and lots of nice ideas there. So sorry, I am being too enthusiastic with my mouse pad there. So the benefits for learners are things that we've touched on thus far. Responsibility for learning gives them the ability to recognise the next steps that they need to achieve. It gives them confidence. One of the key things about confidence is learners that feel secure even when they get things wrong. That in order to learn, I think we all probably agree that you have to make mistakes, that things will go wrong. That's the nature of learning. And an autonomous learner tends to feel more confident and secure even if they make mistakes. This links to the next point, the issue of self-esteem and confidence. Autonomous learners tend to be more actively involved and more motivated as well. And I think that's very important. So you might have already seen a flash of this. My next question is, how does that help us as teachers? What are the benefits for us as teachers? Again, could you please type your ideas into the text box? What would be the benefit for you as a teacher if you have a group of autonomous learners? And it's not, I can just run away from the classroom and leave them to it. Just in case you were thinking that, which I'm sure you weren't. Okay, so We've got some suggestions coming through. It's a good way to find out what they're interested in. Svetlana says sharing responsibility, absolutely. Motivated learners make for a more dynamic classroom, from Donna, that's true. Thanaju says it's easier to guide them. Brian says easier life and it's easier to keep them focused. I agree. Sam suggests that motivated students make motivated teachers. I think that's a very nice point. I think there's a kind of mirror between teachers and learners very often. And yes, the classroom is more efficient. So let's have a look. So we've already mentioned this, responsibility shifts to the learner. It's very important that learners understand that they are responsible for their own learning. And this links up very much to the point about lifelong learning for students, that students are then able to shift this into other realms of their experience and learning progress. Feedback will also help you as a teacher identify their progress. Remember that progress is not just concrete outcomes, it's also linked to effective progress. If students are very reticent to answer things, if they don't feel at all confident, they're not going to offer answers easily, they're not going to speak as easily. So getting learner feedback will help you to understand how students feel about what they're doing and about their own progress, as well as where they think their own problems are. If a learner is self-aware, the teacher can take into account their thinking and their strategies and support them better. If you understand what your learners like, what they dislike, where they lack confidence, you know where you can focus your classes. In the chat, somebody has mentioned trust as a key issue. Antonia said building trust, and I think that's true. If your students trust you and if you trust them to be part of the process, you can work as a team much better. And it does help ensure that lessons are smoother because you've got more confident learners who are motivated to learn. So for all of these reasons, I think ensuring that your students are autonomous, that they are involved in their own learning pathways and self-assessment allows you an easier path as a teacher. Now, I asked you earlier, you know, how does this, do you see this? How do you see this in your own classrooms? And if you remember, lots of people said, yes, I do see it. Lots of people said, it's quite difficult, it depends on their age, depends on their confidence. So I think that those issues are true. And I'd like to think about the key elements that link to developing, in particular, self-assessment, but also peer assessment in your students. So is it easy to do? No, it isn't. Is it possible? Absolutely. One of the biggest problems, I think, is that we don't think very systematically about this. So I think one of the first steps for you as teachers is to break down the elements that students need to develop in order to be able to self-assess and to work more autonomously, more independently. If you're able to identify these characteristics logically and systematically, you will then be able to develop some practical techniques to start building them up. And we'll go on to look at some practical classroom techniques a bit later on. So first of all, the 4 key areas for self and peer assessment. Okay. One of the first things that learners need is they need to understand what their goals and objectives are. So as teachers, one of the first things we need to do is make sure that we are sharing our learning objectives. Many of you may well already be doing this, and we're going to look at some interesting ways to do it shortly. But if you are not sharing your learning objectives with your learners, that's the first step, I think, is to make sure that this becomes a standard part of your practice. If you don't tell the learners the goals, the aims, what your learning objectives are, and that's both short-term for this particular lesson that you're about to do, but also long-term across weeks or months or the whole course, then you can't expect them to be conscious and focused on achieving those objectives. So step number 1, share objectives. Step number 2, we've talked about confidence and feeling confident about error, not worrying about it. So the next step, I think, is that it's key that learners are given a positive attitude toward error. If students are not confident that they can make mistakes in a safe environment, then they are not going to push themselves to progress into unknown areas. As you move forward into unknown areas, you make mistakes. Learners have to feel confident about doing that. So the next step for the teacher is to think very clearly about how you ensure your learners can develop a positive attitude to error. Third, I think teachers talk about self-reflection, talk about autonomy, but it's very much less common that teachers actually plan for this, that they put slots into lesson plans for self-reflection, that they actually think about strategies and techniques that they can show their students to help students self-reflect, to help them develop this particular skill. Many do, but not everybody. And finally, having identified these characteristics, these elements that we require of our learners, I think we need to ensure that we are using our classroom activities and our classroom management to support these processes of self-assessment. Okay, so how do we use these activities to encourage students to self-assess and to be autonomous? Okay, so those are the 4 elements that I think are important, and I think if you can be conscious of those 4 things, it's really important that we then break them down and that we start to build them up step by step. One of the biggest errors, I think, is that teachers say, right, I need my students to self-reflect and I need them to be autonomous. So what I'm going to do is this: I'm going to give them some tasks to do outside of the classroom and leave them to it. Actually, we need to scaffold these skills. We need to gradually build up these skills with learners and support them so that they develop autonomy. It doesn't just appear magically. So let's start off, and we're going to work our way through the list, starting off with number 1, sharing learning objectives with learners. Then we'll look at error. We'll look at self-reflection, and we will suggest ways that we can build this through our classroom activities and classroom management. And we're going to start with number 1, sharing learning objectives. So step by step, as I said, the first step is ensuring that learners understand what their objectives are. Okay. So, ways of sharing learning objectives. The most obvious thing is that you could tell students at the beginning of a lesson, and then you could tell them at the end of the lesson and do a quick progress check. So that is one way to do it. I'm sure lots of you are doing this, so bear with me if you think, yes, I already do it. And if you don't do it, let's consider some ways of doing it. One thing is that people tend to just state learning objectives, but actually I think you need to just break it down slightly more. So you need to make sure that you are giving them clear objectives at the beginning written in their words. So rather than talking about I'm going to teach you this or I'm going to show you that, we actually word it from student perspective. So for example, in a lesson on expressing likes, before the lesson you could have this up on the board. By the end of the lesson I will be able to say if I like something a little, a lot, etc. At the end of the lesson, you could turn these into can-do statements. So you could ask them to say yes or no to this. I can say if I like something a little or a lot or not. Okay, so stating the learning objectives at the beginning of the lesson and stating them as can-dos by the end of the lesson is the simplest way to share your learning objectives. Just a little task on this. Often we can pick up lesson objectives and can-do statements from the book. So, for example, Empower is a CUP book where the objectives are set at the beginning of each unit and then the can-do statements are listed at the end. But you can do it yourself as well. So, if we were, for example, doing a lesson on adjectives of appearance for a low-level group, he is tall, she is tall, etc., what do you think you could put as your learning objective at the beginning of the lesson? What could you write up on the board? So you could write on the board, by the end of this lesson, I will be able to... What would you put? Remember to put it in language that the students can understand. I'll give you a moment. Could you put your ideas into the text box, please? Okay, so by the end of the lesson, I will be able to describe a person's appearance from Rebecca. That's nice and clear. Andrew suggested I'll be able to describe people. Valeria said talk about a person's appearance. And she suggested pre-teaching the word appearance. Yeah, I would say that's a great point, Valeria, because I did say make sure it's graded for your learners. So E. Manders has said I will be able to describe what a person looks like. That's nicely graded. Okay. Svetlana said, tell me what your mum looks like. That's very specific. You could say, I would be able to tell you what my family look like, what my friends look like. Okay, so lots of nice ideas. And all you have to do for the end of the lesson is turn that into an I can. So I can tell you what a person looks like, for example. All right. So a simple way to get students involved with this is to put the objectives on the board at the beginning of the lesson and ask them to tell you the can-do statements at the end of the lesson. So rather than give them the can-do statements, you ask them to produce the can-do statements. I've suggested popping these up on the board, but let's look at some other ways of sharing the objectives. Okay, so the first one we've looked at, you put them on the board, students can copy them down, you could go back to them halfway through. Another technique is that I write, sometimes I used to write the objectives on very large cards, and I would show the card at the front of the class at the beginning of a lesson, and then I would stick it on the notice board under my today notice. And I also had a done notice on a different part of the notice board. At the end of the lesson, I would ask the students to say, I can do, and I would move the large card over to the done part of the board. So that's one technique. Another is that you get students to use a tick list. Donna has suggested this as well. So you give them the objectives on a paper. You might give them for the week or for the month, and you ask them at the end of the lesson to go back and tick down the I can and tick off if they can. Just a quick point here. Do make sure that you say to the students it's okay to not tick it. I think sometimes students and teachers get into a habit of you just to do this as a bit of paperwork at the end. But what you really, really need to do is to say at the end of it, if you can't do it, don't be worried about not ticking or about ticking the I can't do it yet list. So give them that option. Remember, the whole point of this is to actually get them to feel confident about saying what they can and can't do. Another example is that the teacher provides exemplars and students create or negotiate the learning outcomes. So in this particular example, you might show them something. For example, if I wanted to focus on formal writing, I might show them a formal email, and I might say to them, okay, this is a model of some of the sorts of things we're going to look at today. What do you think we could achieve in this lesson if this is our model? What kinds of things could we learn to do? And the students will actually produce their own can-do statements, what they want to be able to do by the end of the lesson. So it's very important to put these exemplars out there and get the students to be involved in the decision making. Remember that if you want autonomous learners, you have to give them the chance to make some decisions within the classroom. You can't just expect them to start making decisions at home. So a really key thing is to build up their decision making skills within the class. So give exemplars and let them start to create their own learning outcomes. From formal emails, for example, they might say, I want to learn how to do the layout of an email. I want to learn how to do the openings and the sign-off for a formal email. I want to do academic writing, all sorts of things, but you can let them make the decision. Obviously, the simplest format is that students will copy out their learning objectives, put them into notebooks at the beginning of the week, and they go back and tick or cross. Alternatively, you could have posters. You could put posters up on the wall, and each time you achieve something as an overall class, the teacher will go up and tick things off on the poster, or you get the students to go and tick things off. Okay, so lots of different ideas there. Another idea, this works very well with young learners, is that you have a big glass jar full of ping pong balls, and you get a marker pen and you write a key word or a key aim on each of the ping pong balls. You have another second empty jar, and each time you finish an aim, you achieve an aim as a class overall, you transfer one of the balls from the full ping pong jar to the empty jar, and the student can literally see their learning developing. And if they are young learners, it's quite fun to select a student each time to try and throw the ball and see if they can get it into the empty jar. The only tip I would give you with that is make sure that you have some sort of lid on them or a control, because otherwise the students might sneak in early and throw all the ping pongs in the wrong jar. Okay, so there we go. That works very well with young learners. We'll come back to some other ideas in a minute, but I'd like to look a little bit at positive attitude to errors. So we were saying another key element of autonomy is enabling students to be positive about errors. Now, here I've written down slips and errors, and I just wanted to identify that there is a difference. Could anybody very briefly type in what you think the difference is between slips and errors without getting too technical? Okay, so somebody has said errors can be fossilised, and somebody said a slip is a minor mistake. Slips are things that people tend to be able to fix themselves. It just slips out and then they realise it's wrong. Errors are much more embedded. There's an ongoing or systematic problem. Now, errors are useful because often they come through what we call interlanguage. As students begin to develop, they will start to make errors, and this is because they are risk-taking, they are developing their language. So a good thing to do is to actually identify this to students, to actually point out to them the benefit of making errors. And then I use some little activities. So for example, rather than just identifying errors, I get students to do something called My Favourite Error. In My Favourite Error, they actually identify an error that they make typically, and they do a little 1-minute presentation, perhaps in groups, and they say to the rest of the group why they think the error that they make, their favourite error, is the best favourite error to make. And at the end, the group will vote. So it might be, for example, third person S because everyone else in the class does the same, and it's a really common mistake. It's just a little bit of humour, but by actually talking about it, it allows them to feel more comfortable with the errors, and it also really highlights to them typical errors that they may not be conscious of making themselves. So it's about developing a more comfortable attitude to error. That works quite well. I also use 15-minute study support slots. So with older students, you can give them study support slots where they do 15 minutes of their own work and they try to identify typical patterns in their own error making. And you can give them feedback from homework, written feedback, to help them identify these errors. And just even if they don't actually find them all, being conscious and thinking about the errors that they typically make allows them to be more aware, and also gives them more of a sense of being comfortable around those errors. Okay. The other thing that we mentioned was planning for self-reflection. So we've looked at some ways of ensuring that students feel more comfortable about error. And now we want them to self-reflect. And I mentioned earlier, one of the things that teachers do is they say, I want my students to be autonomous, but they don't plan for it. So a really good thing to do is to have set spots during the lessons, for example, at the end of the week, where you ask them to self-reflect. How do you get them to do this? Well, one way is to actually, in those slots, even if it's just 5 minutes, give them guided questions. So, for example, a simple guided question is, what do you think you've learnt? That's enough on its own. However, you can also give them questions to fill in like this. Just get them to write down notes, and they can do it as pairs. Pairs will allow them to talk to somebody they feel comfortable with about these things, and if you go around and listen, you can pick up quite a lot of information. You can simplify the self-reflection a lot by using smiley and frowny faces, or by using things like I liked, I didn't like, in the lesson I learned. So that's a simple version. You can make a much more complex version for high-level learners. What do I remember and understand? How do I know if my work is good, etc., and get them to fill in their ideas about this. So you can make it more or less difficult. I saw in the chat some people were talking about KYL earlier. So you can also get them to fill in charts such as the KWL charts, not Y, what they know, what they would still like to know, and what they feel confident that they have learned. So this shows you things that they think they know, things they still would like to know, and where they feel much more confident. These are quite nice charts, simple to fill in. Also, you can use learner diaries and learner journals. This is really good for picking up affective issues as well, how confident they feel. But it also gives you evidence of their writing and whether they have picked up certain language points. So this is a really good way to do self-reflection. If you give them planned slots, it will help them. You can also do a 1-minute paper. This is an online paper. Where if you have facilities to work online, you literally give them a minute to write down anything they can about how they felt about a lesson at the end of the lesson. Very quick, very neat, and then you can download their responses. Okay, so these are all good ways to get your students to reflect, as well as just getting them to have a response partner, to talk to a partner, or discussion groups. So just in the last part of this, just before we wind up for questions, I've got a couple more things to mention. Learner-generated reports work quite well if you give them the report format that the teachers use and ask them to fill in themselves from the perspective of a teacher. That really encourages people to think about self-assessment. And we can also make sure our classroom activity encourages self-assessment just as they go along their daily activities. Traffic lights are very helpful. Now, I know that teachers often use this for discipline with young learners, so they put a red light up if students are being noisy. But you can also get your students to use traffic lights. You can give them a little set of traffic lights, and they can put red for I don't understand or I can't do this. They could put green for I'm happy or I like this. So you can actually give them little sets, and as they work at their desk, you can whiz around and you can see very instantly if somebody has got a red help please traffic light or a green I'm very confident. Another is to use red or green voting cards. Very simple to make. They're a bit of a hassle to make the first time, but once you've made a set, you've got them forever if you laminate them. You can clip them together with little paper clips, put one down on each student desk. The student just puts a red or a green when they feel that they understand or don't understand something. Again, you can use the red cards for I can do this, I can't do this, I like it, I don't like it. You can also test their understanding. You can ask them true, false questions, agree, disagree questions, and they actually wave their red or green cards in the air. So if you've got larger classes, it helps you to get a very quick picture. If you are teaching pronunciation, regular and irregular verbs, you can again get them to use their red or green cards. So you could say, is this regular? Show me your green card. Or irregular? Show me your red card, for example. Okay, so these are useful ways of getting students to show, assessing students as they work very visibly. Okay, mini whiteboards. This is a picture of a large whiteboard, but you can buy little tiny whiteboards that students can use either in groups or one-to-one. They're very cheap. Again, these can be used for self-assessment. So you can get your students to write down smiley faces or frowny faces. So you can say, do you understand? And they can draw their little face. You can get them to write down yes or no, true or false. That gives you a sense both of how they are self-assessing, and also you can ask them questions that allow you to assess them. And again, if they hold up the mini whiteboards in the air, you can make a very quick judgment of how much they've understood, even with a large group. So mini whiteboards, really effective tools to work with in a classroom. Here are some other ideas. I think you'll be able to see this on YouTube later, so do have a look through the different ideas there of picking up on errors and ways of encouraging peer feedback. But I'm going to move on because we're running out of time. So assessment can be used as learning to highlight short-term goals, long-term goals. We can help our students assess themselves and to become autonomous. But just to summarise, it's important as teachers that we do this through showing them their objectives in different ways, in fun ways, giving them reflection slots and actually encouraging them to reflect, and using simple tools like traffic lights and red and green cards to allow them to self-assess and to allow us to assess them during our normal classroom activities. So key aspects of learning-oriented learning: they take responsibility for their own learning, they are able to share feedback to help themselves, and you have some evidence of their learning through those techniques. And I think that's probably all we have time for, so probably moving on to questions. And I hope that that was useful for you all. Please ask away if you've got some questions.
Great, thank you very much, Steph, for an interesting session. So please feel free to post any questions in the chat. We've got a couple already. We've got one from Tian saying, I'm teaching a class with several students being very motivated to take charge of their own learning and a large group of students with low self-esteem to learn. Is there any suggestions to bridge the gap in this sort of mixed ability of autonomy?
Okay, so I think the whole purpose of autonomy is to allow people to develop at different rates. So using the techniques I've suggested, you can do different things with them. So, for example, where you've got students who are very, very self-motivated, what you could do is you can ask them to do things like suggest, for example, when you're setting learning objectives, ask the motivated, the stronger learners to set the objectives, perhaps by choosing objectives themselves, by showing them exemplars as we talked about, or by talking about the overall aim of the lesson and saying to them, what do you think we need to do by the end of lesson? The weaker students could do the can-do statements, which is really just picking up on what's already been produced, so it's a much less demanding task. If you are asking them to do something at home, you can, I'm a big fan of differentiating. So for example, saying, here are 10 questions I'd like you to answer at home. You must do 3 questions. You can do 10 questions. So the weaker learners only do 3 maybe, but the stronger learners whiz through and do 10. So it's all about differentiating what you are doing with the learners and actually giving them the chance to choose to do more or less. If the weaker students do less, make sure that you give them plenty of praise for the little bit that they do, because what I find is that less motivated learners tend to lack confidence. It's really important to praise them and say, well done on doing your 3 questions, and, you know, maybe try for 4 next time.
Great, thank you very much. Christine asks, what about when students are over autonomous and they take over the teaching sometimes?
Oh, that's nice and easy. Give them the teaching pen and let them get on with it. I think project work is very good for that type of thing. So give them project work or give them extensions. I mean, if they are coming up with ideas that are really, really useful, and if they are very confident, set them those tasks for extra homework. If they're strong and they're confident, put them in a group and say to them, okay, decide on an extra task that you guys are all going to do at home. And again, make sure that you give your weaker learners a chance to contribute something, perhaps by doing some checks with them before asking whole class feedback, so that the weaker students can be confident and offer answers, and they get a chance to show the group that they can also achieve. So I think, again, it's about differentiation and balance.
Great, thank you very much. I think we've just got time for one more. We've got a question from Samuel, who asked, do we need to correct, when we're talking about error correction and making students comfortable with their errors, do we need to correct them implicitly or explicitly? And does this differ between younger and older learners, do you think?
Okay, so I think it depends on your types of task. I think if you are focused on looking at accuracy. It's very good to correct errors explicitly, perhaps not aimed at single learners, but just as a group. So I use a lot of phrases like, I've heard lots of you say this, or some of you have said this. And then I correct explicitly. I think with written work, you can use correction keys and get them to correct themselves. However, I think that sometimes, for example, if you're working on fluency, you should perhaps ignore some errors and let them get on with it a bit, because what you're trying to do is build up fluency and confidence. And if you always correct students every time they open their mouths, they're never going to build up that confidence to just give it a go and speak. So it should be a mixture of balance depending on the aim of that particular thing that you are trying to do, but also encouraging it to be done with humour, encouraging students to correct each other. Peer correction works really well, and not doing it all the time, I think, is the key thing. Give them the chance to just speak sometimes and build up their confidence.
Great, thank you very much, Steph. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today, but don't forget that we'll be back next week on Tuesday, October the 20th, when Herbert Puchter will be discussing how to help teens to think beyond language, discussing critical thinking, values, and self-esteem. We've also got plenty more webinars lined up for you over the next couple of months, and you can sign up for all of them by visiting our events page, which I'll paste into the chat now. The recording of today's webinar should be live on our blog and our YouTube channel next week, and we'll send you a certificate of attendance next week as well. So thank you all for attending, and we'll see you very soon.